the report by Mrs. Ford, control of the acquisition and possession of weapons. Mrs. Ford, the floor is yours for 4 minutes.
Good morning. There has been a common European gun law for over 25 years. It sets out the processes whereby member states give authorisations to individuals to own, buy and sell firearms. However, certain poorly deactivated salute and acoustic firearms were able to be bought and sold without authorisation, and some of these were reconverted and used in the tragic Paris attacks. A cache of similar firearms were discovered in the UK. The European law does need reviewing. The first set of proposed amendments from the European Commission were very poorly drafted. They would have put disproportionate restrictions on many legal owners, was not supported by an impact assessment, and the proposals had many technical failings. But over the past 18 months, I and colleagues across this Parliament have worked with many different stakeholders, as well as law enforcement authorities, proof houses and legal experts, in order to protect the interests of legitimate owners, whilst also addressing the security issues. There have been some misleading reports in the press, and I'd like to set the record clear here. In reality, the Parliament text that we're voting on today has made many significant improvements. Firstly, firearms will not be restricted based on their cosmetic appearance. This is legally unworkable. Military reservists, museums, filmmakers and collectors will be able to continue their ownership provided their member state agrees. Member states will continue to organise and protect their own national security, national reserve and public defence services. This meets the needs of countries like Finland and respects the situation in Switzerland. Technical issues with deactivation standards have been reassessed, and holders of genuinely deactivated firearms, like reenactors, will be able to continue their ownership. The controversial proposal for mandatory medical and psychological tests has been rejected, and instead each country will have in place its own system for assessments. There are provisions to support younger owners and for those in rural areas. There are new measures for clearer marking, for better information sharing between member states and for safe storage. But we have taken care not to put overly burdensome requirements on small traders or on historical items. There are new, stricter controls on certain semi-automatic firearms when they are fitted with high-capacity magazines, and on automatic firearms that are being converted into semi-automatics. However, and this is important, individuals who legally own these today will be able to continue to do so, provided their own member state agrees. Target shooters will also be able to own these and continue to practice and participate in their sport, again, provided their own member state agrees. There are new provisions on magazines which do go beyond what the Parliament Committee initially proposed. However, the representatives from Europe's 28 member states insisted that these should be covered. Today, there are some additional amendments tabled by colleagues. These are not new. They've largely already been considered by the Parliament and rejected by the Member States and the Council. And if they are adopted, this could risk destabilising the entire agreement. This negotiation has been a long and difficult process. It's unfortunate that the original proposal came with so many failings from the Commission. But the changes that we have now agreed will close the loophole and be an important contribution to our security, whilst also respecting the rights of legal owners. And I expect Member States to use their new powers to support those legal owners and thus avoid disproportionate restrictions. I would like to thank all my colleagues for their help on this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ford. Next would be Mrs. Valero for the Libe Committee for 2 minutes.
Vapendirektivet är ju en fråga som...
The Weapons Directive is a question which has become well known in Europe. Hunters who have the feeling that that their activities will be limited or even banned. I can understand that feeling. The proposal, Vicky Ford, as Vicky Ford said, has been put forward hurriedly after the Paris attacks. The idea was to increase the security of European citizens, but also to use existing law. And if you want to ban a whole range of firearms hurriedly, that would have impacts. It's about illegal firearms. The Firearms Directive is not for fighting terrorism. It's about national weapons law can be applied properly. The question is preventing firearms getting into the wrong hands or being used incorrectly. There are rules for deactivation and proof marks, and proper rules for trade in the most dangerous firearms. The Firearms Directive is not about fighting trade in illegal weapons. Apart from the Firearms Directive, there is work on weapons in the grey market and activities in law enforcement authorities and other programs, for example, purchasing programs, or the use of military weapons used in post-conflict areas. Many countries have very strict rules, others less strict. Some have mandatory examinations, some have none. And I fully agree with what Vicky Ford has already said.
Good morning. I would now like to ask you for your introductory remarks. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today for what I hope is the final vote by the Parliament to approve the revised Firearms Directive. We have one shared objective: to cut off and limit the access of criminals and terrorists to guns. Our citizens rightly expect us to deliver on this, to reinforce our collective security. That means cracking down on the trade in illegal weapons, but it also means strengthening controls on legally held firearms, where there are gaps and vulnerabilities. Far from penalising legitimate gun owners and gun users, as some have suggested, by revising the directive, we are in fact enlisting their support in the fight against those who misuse guns. We know there are many law-abiding citizens who pursue hobbies involving firearms and who don't want them falling into the wrong hands. We completely respect that. The revision of the directive is not designed to stop people enjoying their pastimes. But as we crack down on the illegal trade in weapons, we need to strengthen the rules around the acquisition, possession, storage and traceability of legal firearms. Clearer rules on marking and registration should improve traceability, providing reassurance for legal gun owners that their weapons cannot be used with impunity should they fall into the wrong hands. Like all of us, I'd very much like to be able to say that criminal violence and terrorist attacks are a thing of the past. Sadly, that isn't the case, so it's important not to be naive about the ongoing threat level or its likely consequences. Ensuring that criminals and terrorists do not find it easy to acquire powerful and dangerous firearms with the intention of harming our fellow citizens is a collective responsibility that encompasses both the legal and the illegal trade. The fact that the perpetrators of terrorist atrocities in the last 2 years were able to use modified acoustic and deactivated weapons that were bought legally was the driving force behind the Commission's proposal to revise the directive. En effet, la directive actuelle...
In fact, the present directive on firearms, which dates back to 1991, does have big security gaps and lackings. In fact, we know that some firearms that were used in the Charlie Hebdo attacks were acoustic weapons that had been converted into lethal weapons. Now, the present directive doesn't cover acoustic weapons. We also know that badly deactivated guns can be reactivated and used for killing, and in the same way some automatic weapons transformed into semi-automatic weapons, and this is authorised by the present directive, can, with a little experience and with tools available on internet, be reconverted into automatic weapons. And so there we needed to act urgently in order to fill these gaps and in order to strengthen the safety of our citizens.
Represents a compromise. It's well known that the Commission favoured doing more in some areas, but it was the subject of extensive discussion, and I want here to recognise the work that's been done by members of this Parliament and by the Member States to reach today's result. And that result will significantly further strengthen security in a number of key areas, as we've heard. First, it will prohibit automatic firearms which have been transformed into semi-automatics. In addition, the directive will also ban semi-automatic firearms that have a high firing capacity, above 10 rounds for the long semi-automatic firearms and above 20 rounds for the short ones. The Commission would have liked to go further, but recognises that the co-legislators did not support going further. Second, alarm and acoustic weapons will fall within the scope of the directive for the first time. These firearms will now need to be declared or authorised in order to ensure traceability. This is particularly important given, as we know, some of the recent attacks have involved converted alarm and acoustic weapons. Third, museums and collectors will also fall within the scope of the directive. Following a request from the Parliament and the Council, however, they will be allowed, subject to strict security conditions, to possess Category A firearms. Fourth, deactivated firearms must now be declared to national authorities and registered. This is key to prevent the illegal sale of reactivated firearms or parts of firearms. To complete this measure and ensure that the deactivation process is carried out in an effective and irreversible manner, the Commission proposed an implementing regulation to ensure common standards across the EU. This regulation, in force since April 2016, is currently being revised and strengthened to address technical issues flagged by some Member States and indeed by members of the Parliament. 2 rounds of expert meetings have resulted in agreement on draft revised technical specifications. These are now being stress tested by national practitioners and experts who will report back in late March. Provided the stress tests have not revealed any remaining major problems, the Firearms Committee will then be in a position formally to adopt the revised, strengthened regulation by the end of April. Other important measures have also been included in the revised directive, such as stricter conditions for the online acquisition of firearms, clearer rules on the marking of firearms to improve traceability, and the establishment of a system to improve exchange of information between Member States. In revising the directive, we've sought to strike a balance. At the request of the Council and the Parliament, a derogation has been agreed, as we've heard, for sport shooters to acquire otherwise prohibited firearms under strict conditions, including proof of a legitimate and regular sport shooting activity for which the weapon is required. Hunters should not be affected by the revised directive, as they would not usually use the type of firearms that will be prohibited. At the same time, we've continued to step up our action against trafficking in firearms, implementing the EU Action Plan of December 2015. That includes appointing national focal points to track, trace and gather intelligence on illegal firearms. I've written to Member States recently about this to ensure that we all implement what we have signed up to. It also means strengthening cooperation with the authorities across the Balkans to crack down on illegal trafficking in that region. That said, we need to keep working on this. Europol's Serious and Organised Crime Threat Assessment, published last week, shows that weapons trafficking remains a key crime area. Illegal firearms are increasingly available online via the darknet. a key facilitator for the trade in illegal firearms. So we will continue to tackle firearms trafficking as a priority under the new EU policy cycle for the years 2018 to 2021, allowing national law enforcement authorities and Europol to take coordinated action against firearms trafficking and notably the online trade. To conclude, I'd like to thank you again for all the effort that went into achieving this balanced deal that respects legitimate users while reinforcing our collective security. It will help further to squeeze the space in which criminals and terrorists operate and seek to do us harm. Your vote today is a key step, but the work doesn't end there. Once agreed, the directive will need to be implemented in Member States. The Commission stands ready to assist in this process and will closely monitor its implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now I open the debate on behalf of the political groups. The first would be Madam Corazza Bildt for the EPP. You have, Madam, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Today we are improving security in Europe without restricting people's freedoms. We are removing dangerous loopholes. It's not enough to say that the rules are good in some countries. We need minimum common standards because we have a single market and free circulation. It is not a legislation against terrorism because we're going to be taking other measures to fight against illegal measures. We want to ensure that legal weapons do not end up in the wrong hands because that is something which has already happened. I am very committed on these issues because they affect a number of people. I come from a family of 6 generations of hunters, and I understand the concerns that some people have. People who respect the law feel that their finger is being pointed at them. I have met with relevant organizations and I'm very impressed by their focus on security. That's a focus shared both by hunters and sport shooters. And I can assure you that I have been listening and I have proposed measures. And respecting subsidiarity, we have done everything we can to ensure that countries that already have effective systems are able to keep them. In the EPP, we have been focusing on the interests of hunters and sport shooters, and I want to reassure them that they will be able to continue to carry out their leisure activities. And I have fought to ensure that the provision on distance sales, because people who live in rural areas have difficulty in accessing, and we need to think about people who are living there, and the medical checks which are required have been removed as a result of measures that I have taken. People should not be afraid. They shouldn't say that things are too complicated to propose measures which are, in fact, a way to get easy votes. What we need to do is address people's concerns and not fall in the trap of populism. We cannot put off the directive because we are afraid of the way that it will be interpreted at national level. And we encourage the member states to implement the legislation in an adequate manner, and I promise that I will keep a very close eye on this in future.
S&D for 2.5 minutes, Mr. Cofferati.
Thank you, President. I believe that the solution that we've arrived at is a major and positive achievement. And I'm saying this very directly. We worked very hard and we laboured because the original conditions weren't the best possible. The earlier directive was an old directive which left behind big legislative loopholes and gaps. And as has been said, the technical solutions adopted in various member states, and also the culture of the relationship between citizens and weapons varies a lot from country to country. So we needed to bring different points of view closer together. We needed to balance, strike a balance between very different situations in various member states. And finally, Commissioner, I know you're not responsible for this because you weren't around at the time, but the Commission original proposal wasn't a very good one at all. It was very approximate, and it made a political error of bringing together the idea of amending a directive while at the same time trying to fight terrorism, and these are two entirely different things. And we have, I think, tidied things up. We've tidied up the original proposal, and I say it was a very approximate approach at the first time round from the Commission, and we've now got certainty for those people who were worried, sports shooters, hunters, and they felt they were being attacked, and they'd always respected the law, and then all of a sudden they felt as if they were in the dock and aimed at by this directive, which actually didn't really concern them when it comes to respect for the law. And we've also created the right conditions so that the market will be a regulated market, so that it won't encourage fakes or replicas, and it also won't make it easy for people to get hold of illicit weapons on the market. And what you've said is right, including the difficulty we had at the final stage when it comes to the trialogue. But the banning of the two types of semi-automatic weapons and particularly dangerous weapons is something that's been done according to objective criteria, and not just in a sort of arbitrary way as originally proposed by the Commission. Also, the conversion of automatic weapons, that quite rightly has been now brought under control. And we also said that certain exemptions, for example, the Finnish defence system, which shouldn't have been touched upon in any way. We've also introduced this idea of marking, and also the acoustic weapons and alarm weapons will be covered by the directive. So we've tidied things up. We worked patiently, without manipulating this, without entering into demagogics, and I think that what we've arrived at is a very major destination. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gofferati. Now for the ECR for 1 minute, Mr. Sulik.
Thank you very much. The Commission thinks that if a terrorist attacks, he first needs authorization and then procures a weapon. That's naive. Because if you would think like that, then you'd have to ban vehicles, etc., because terrorists use those weapons to make terrorist attacks. It's not just about terrorists getting their hands on these illegal weapons, as if the majority of the population wasn't fed up. They continue until everything falls apart. People don't need so many limitations. They know.
For ALDE, Mrs. Charanzova for 2.5 minutes.
Děkuji, pane předsedající.
Thank you very much, Chair. Commissioner, we all can agree that we want a safe and secure Europe. How is it possible that a document which is intended to increase security is not being welcomed with applause? There are opponents to it right across the EU. Why didn't you focus on the actual security issues? Instead, you're attacking the rights of legal gun owners, people who didn't carry out terrorist attacks. There is much that we could do to improve security. We have no clear rules on the deactivation of weapons, no clear rules about it is weapons that were registered as deactivated that were used in Paris. and you should be in a position to get the information quicker. There should be a more rapid exchange of information. And I could list many other issues. You said very recently that people who don't have ill intent have nothing to fear, but this is quite wrong. They have very legitimate fears. They are hunters, sport shooters, and former members of security services who own weapons, and they are worried about the directive. They are worried that they will no longer be able to possess their weapons. And as a result of the work done by the European Parliament, many improvements have been made to the text, but unfortunately we got stuck halfway. We had a lot of logical arguments, but if you have logical arguments, then you should be presenting them to them. And the Commission felt that it wasn't necessary to carry out impact assessment, and we are attacking the rights of European citizens. I submitted a number of amendments, and I would like to ask those present to support these proposed amendments. Commissioner, look around you. In the current situation, we cannot allow ourselves to have illogical, senseless legislation. There's more at stake than you think.
Charanzova, I have a blue card for you from Mr. Sulik. Are you ready to accept it? Mr. Sulik, please go ahead.
Thank you. Mrs. Charanzova, you talked about deactivation of firearms. I'd like to ask you a question. Don't you think that after the last revision of 2008, and that was the task of the Commission to come up with a deactivation regulation, and that's coming in late after Paris, isn't it that a failing of the Commission? Shouldn't the Commission first of all do its job?
Micro, please.
Vážený pane kolego, já s vámi absolutně
Dear colleague, I agree entirely. If something is missing in the EU, it is clear rules on deactivation. This is one of the problems was one of the problems with the terror attacks, and I am very pleased that our group, the ALDE group, from at the very beginning, has supported the adoption of that regulation.
Commissioner, due to time reasons, I will always accept one blue card per person. The next on my list is Ms. Maštálka for GUE for a minute and a half.
Thank you, President. If we had a proposal on the table which would obviously and evidently increase the security in the European Union, I'd be the first to vote for that proposal. But I am convinced that this piece of paper is not the right piece of legislation. The draft directive that we're voting on tomorrow doesn't solve any problems in my mind. It concentrates on the restrictions of the rights of owners of legal weapons, sport shooters and people who have historical weapons. I don't think we can assume at all that the new rules will have any positive impact at all, because we've asked the Commission many times. We haven't had an expert analysis from the Commission about this legislation. I think we'd all agree that a terrorist is not just going to go into an ordinary gun shop to buy a gun, and that there are strict bans on certain illegal weapons. That will mean that most of these weapons will be achieved on the black market, and they will be acquired illegally, and so that there will still be access to illegal weapons for criminals and terrorists. I'm not convinced that this draft directive is going to reduce the risk of future terrorist attacks. Thank you.
Maštálka, the next on my list would be Mr. Šoltes for the Greens for 1 minute.
Thank you very much for the floor, Mr. President. So, if the aim of this draft directive was to fight terrorism effectively, I'm afraid that we have missed the target. Why? Because we focused on the wrong actors, wrong stakeholders. We focused on legal owners of firearms. They do not represent the threat of terrorism itself. We've received a lot of emails by legal owners saying that they felt like they were part of this terrorist system when they were reading our documents. So I think that the directive, if we want to fight terrorism, we should focus on the so-called black market. That is where these bad deals are made. That is where firearms trafficking takes place, and this leads to terrorist attacks. So I think that we need to use directives to strengthen cooperation between member states, data exchanges and so on. Yes, some member states already have very good legislation, like Slovenia. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is Mr. Iwaskiewicz for EFDD for 2 minutes.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, first off, I thank the shooting associations, collectioners, hunters, museums, and also 20,000 people who have sent an email to me defending freedom of ownership for firearms. This directive clearly demonstrates all the problems that we're dealing with here in Europe. This directive is misplaced. No impact assessment. We should have rejected this draft immediately. This draft does not give a positive message about firearms. We only use negative arguments and mistrust directed at our own citizens. They, according to us, they may not decide upon their own fate, and governments are afraid of their own citizens. Now, the preamble brings the rationale behind the directive, that is fighting or tackling terrorism. However, those elements seem to be missing in the normative part of the directive. What we're doing, we're just taking away yet another freedom from our citizens. We need to make sure that we listen to our citizens. Now, the Czech Republic will change the constitution, as we hear, with the view of granting access to firearms to every citizen. Freedom of possessing a firearm is a guarantee of our security. This is the first and the most important right we have in fighting terrorism. Mr. Korwin-Mikke always finishes with the sentence that the European Union needs to be destroyed. This directive is a step in this particular direction. Thank you, President.
Mr. Iwaskiewicz, Mrs. Ford would like to put a blue card question to you. Would you accept? Mrs. Ford, please go ahead for half a minute.
You have received many emails from legal owners, from hunters, from target shooters, who are concerned because they think they're going to lose their guns, because you have written to them saying Europe is going to take away their guns. But if you read what we are voting on, every legal owner can continue to own their guns, provided their member states agree. You and others are misleading the public about their rights. They continue to have their rights, provided their member states agree. My question is, have you read what you're voting on?
Okay, the question is clear. Mr. Iwaskiewicz, please, you have half a minute for the answer.
Pani Przewodnicząca.
Chairman, I have never written to anybody claiming that any firearms will be taken away from anybody. What we're taking away is freedom. This is what this directive is all about, because any concrete actions, well, you can imagine, well, an occupying force, an occupied nation but the European Union will never agree on taking away freedoms from our citizens.
Thank you. And now Mrs. Troszczynski for 1 minute for the ENF, please.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, I have a question for you. By magic, will you be able to fight terrorism and trafficking in illegal firearms? Because this is the initial pretext to justify the revision of the directive. We should concentrate on the facts. Terrorists obtain their firearms in the black market, and firearms are going throughout Europe. It's easy to get a AK-48 easier than getting a hunting rifle. So you're attacking honest citizens because you're enabled to fight the Islamic scourge. Because the EU can't protect its citizens, you can't recognize that Schengen is a failure. This directive is illegitimate because it's disproportionate for the target. It doesn't target illegal firearms trafficking. It's unuseful. It's useless because it will restrict the activities of honest citizens. It's disproportionate because it doesn't have any impact. We can't foresee the economic impact in the sector and the impact on citizens. Our group, the ENF, is proposing an amendment to reject this text. I call on you to support that when it comes to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Troszczynski. I have a blue card request for you from Mrs. Grappini. You do accept. So, Mrs. Grappini, you have half a minute.
You said that it's easier to buy an AKA shotgun from the internet than get a permit. Do you know what changes this report brings regarding online sales? Thank you very much.
Troszczynski, you have half a minute for the answer.
Know what we have to do to obtain a firearm. I'm in a shooting club. I know very well what is the procedure for honest citizens to exercise their passion or to obtain a firearm. Thank you.
Thank you. Now for the non-attached, Mr. Synadinos for 1 minute.
Chairman, this specific proposal by the European Commission shows that you're trying to go beyond your executive competences, and you don't understand that your mandate as legislator is and should reflect the needs of citizens. This does not adopt measures to combat terrorism and illegal trade. It just sanctions law-abiding citizens. You can't say that smuggling is caused by the flexibility of the previous directive. Front-loaded museum pieces, target shooting, deactivated collections, semi-automatics do not cause threats and do not participate in illegal activity. Red tape, grouping rules this way, and unsustainable restrictions crushes reason and leads people to buy them from illegal sources. Technical specifications such as the loading capacity of ammunition clips for semi-automatic centre-fire percussion guns is completely unreasonable. I was a former officer of the Greek Special Forces and I use guns, so I think we should leave this to the Member States and vote against this directive.
Be Mrs. Schwab for a minute and a half.
Herr Präsident.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone who has worked on this, including especially Vicky Ford and also Anna Corazza-Bildt, and for the S&D group. I think it is very important work that has been done on a proposal that came from the Commission that wasn't quite as balanced as you presented it. So thank you very much to you as well, because here we really are talking about our response to the attacks in Paris and elsewhere. And we were all very affected by the attacks. But legal weapons did not really play a role in these attacks, but nevertheless the rights of everyone need to be protected, both the legal gun owners and also people's right to security. So we have to, we can't play security off against freedom. We need to find a sort of middle road, and this is why from the beginning I've said legal gun owners will not be subject to additional difficulties as a result of this. We've had very difficult discussions because there are very different rights in member states, And I think we've seen that the discussion is still ongoing in a number of member states, and there are ongoing elections as well, and that's something that we need to bear in mind. But nevertheless, it has been possible to find this middle way to protect the interests, particularly of hunters and sport shooters, and also meet the objective of increased security in Europe. And I hope for that reason everyone will support this proposal today.
Mrs. Kaufmann for a minute and a half.
Thank you very much, President. About 80 million weapons are found in legal ownership in the EU, but that's a reason enough to have another look at the legislation on control and acquisition of and possession of weapons, because what we're talking about is public security, and public security affects us all. In the negotiations, I think we've ended up with a supportable compromise, but I'd have liked some people to be more courageous. People have actually given in to the pressure, massive pressure from the gun lobbies, and sport shooters and hunters were made insecure by highly sort of exploitative debates online. They were manipulated, but I think in the future we will have to have marking of all parts of guns and registration as well, and that will make it easy to carry out traceability and will support the work of our security organisations. When it comes to online purchases, the identity of the purchaser and the buyer has to be checked by authorised bodies, and when it comes to deactive weapons, they will have to be registered as well. And so I think here we've stopped a security loop. We've filled in a security loophole because deactivated guns were being reactivated, and that wasn't traceable. So this new legislation will ensure enhancement of security of our citizens, and therefore I support the final compromise that we've arrived at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kaufmann. I have a question for you, a blue card question from Mr. Zdechovský. Do you accept? Yes, Mr. Zdechovský, you have half a minute.
Pane předsedající, paní kolegyně, já se vás chci zeptat, jestli víte, že deaktivovaná zbraň je úplně stejná jako zbraň, předělat deaktivovanou zbraň, správně deaktivovanou zbraň je úplně stejné jako předělat nebo vyrobit novou zbraň.
Just a second, I understand we have...
We're getting no interpretation.
Fix it.
Okay. Can I speak English, if you want?
So, please go ahead.
Or the German?
Do we have...
Tak je už překlad z češtiny? Jo, je.
Yeah, fine.
Yes, we have interpretation, and I just want to ask the lady whether she knows that once again a deactivated weapon would... I mean, deactivating, taking a deactivated weapon and reconverting it and using it again is very difficult. And there are millions of magazines of ammunition that's never been registered, and the magazine of ammunition is a consumer good, and in the future they should be registered as well. Yes, when it comes to deactivated weapons, I did touch upon that, and I can just say to the colleague that I've become a bit of an expert, and I spoke to representatives of the German police forces, and I know that reactivating deactivated weapons isn't easy. It's true, but it's possible, and therefore it's really important that we put restrictions in the way of this. Thank you.
Mr. Halla-aho for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. When the Commission put forward its proposal to revise the directive, the reason was security and terrorism, but the actual goal of the proposal is the semi-automatic weapons for sport shooters, which have not been used for terrorist attacks, and their role in crime is actually negligible. When this proposal went too far, this was rejected in the Parliament, but the proposal is still very problematic. For example, the limits on the size of magazines have a negative effect on sport shooters, but they don't increase anybody's security. But the exemptions rules are confused and actually contradictory. The proposals breaches all the principles of good legislation, and it's a shame, disgrace to the Union. Those people who respect themselves and this institution vote against this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Deprez, 1 minute.
Monsieur le Commissaire,
Commissioner, you are Commissioner for Security, and so obviously you're going to try and to frame things in that way, and I'd like to believe you, but I do have some doubts. The terrorists didn't go and present their ID in order to buy their weapons. I have a report here from Europol which says that they are buying the weapons on the black market, and then the reactivation of deactivated weapons was only happened in one case. The priority is the fight against the illegal traffic and sale of weapons, and not making things difficult for people who use weapons legitimately for hunting or sporting purposes. But I think there is really a problem that I can't overcome, which is the sale of weapons to people via the internet, and it's not possible to buy medicines off. It's not possible to buy medicines online without a prescription, and so this is something that I do not against. And so, for that reason, I will reluctantly have to vote against the proposal.
1 minute.
Gracias.
Thank you. It's difficult in just 1 minute to sort of actually call to a stop one of the work being done for months by the biggest, most powerful lobby in the world, that is the weapons lobby. It's difficult to fight against that. All of those who worked on this report have felt the pressure from this arms lobby, and there's a huge amount of trade in selling weapons to dictatorships and to countries at war. We're also talking about here selling of weapons to individuals in Europe, but that's not of less importance. There are 25 million weapons owners in the European Union, and lots of studies and common sense would make it clear that if you have more weapons and you have lax legislation, then you're going to have more deaths caused by guns. What we need is more control and much stricter legislation, and we shouldn't use hunting or collecting or sport shooting as an excuse, an alibi for not getting stricter rules. So, honourable members, don't talk about turning into a right what is basically just big business.
Yes, I have a blue card request for you from Mrs. Ford. Do you accept it? Yep. Please, Mrs. Ford, for half a minute.
In your speech, you just said there was going to be an impact on hunters, on sport shooters, on collectors. But under the text we're voting, hunters will be able to continue to hunt, collectors will be able to continue to collect. There needs to be strong protections for security. So my question is, have you read what we're voting on today?
Thank you. You have half a minute for a response.
Señora.
Madam, I don't think you understood what I said. What I said was that there are members in this chamber are using as an alibi, as a pretext, arms collectors, sports shooters, hunters. They're using them as an alibi, a pretext, because basically what they don't want is there to be more checks or more control. They don't want stricter regulation. So they're using that as an excuse, they're using them as an excuse. I think this legislation is going to allow for the continued use of weapons by these people.
Misunderstanding. Mrs. Winberg for 1 minute.
Thank you. The proposal for the new Firearms Directive has been put forward by the EU and to fight terrorism and organised crime. But it's only illegal weapons targeted here. The Commission has used a false premise to take this legislation forward, and this goes against all democratic principles. Putting it another way, there is a great lack of democracy in the EU process. And since there has been no impact assessment, and this was not allowed, there is great legal uncertainty through this proposal. Instead, we should say to people that the EU wants to strengthen the external borders and take measures which are stricter against terrorists and not against legal weapons owners. That's we should do it properly and not do more.
I have a blue card request for you from Mrs. Corazza-Bildt. Do you accept? Mrs. Corazza-Bildt, half a minute.
Madame Winberg har vi inte alls varit inblandad på något.
Yes, Ms. Winberg wasn't part of the negotiations. She didn't take any steps to improve the directive. If the proposal was poor, please take part in the procedure. We're voting. We're not on the Commission proposal, but rather an agreement between Commission and Parliament. How does that limit legal weapons owners? How is it undemocratic if democratic parliaments have negotiated, and if 28 democratic governments have negotiated? It's the same governments as in the member states. How is that not democratic?
Thank you, Madam
Direktiv.
Sorry,
Läs dina papper
no, I
och
do
hålla dig
apologize,
till
but we do
fakta.
have a limit for the blue cards questions, and I have to stick to it. Please, you have half a minute for it.
An interruption from...
Ja du Maria, jag tillhör ju dem.
Yes, dear Maria, I belong to the Popular Party, and we listen to the people. And I've spoken to the sport shooters, I've spoken to the hunters, and they don't know what the situation is going to be. I've looked at all these things, I've read all these things. You're saying that I didn't get involved. I did table amendments. I did make an effort to ensure that this idiotic proposal doesn't get through. And you know yourself that the very few legally held weapons are used in murders and terrorist attacks. I mean, this is looking for a needle in the haystack. This is the wrong approach.
Just give 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, I really get the impression that parts of the European Union are living in a parallel universe. You want to create more security in Europe. Well, that's all well and good, but you seem to ignore the fact that there are jihadists and terrorists who've come to Europe. And around 800,000 illegal weapons in Bosnia. That's been determined by Frontex. But instead of doing something about that, what you're doing is attacking hunters, people who've got security interests, and sport shooters. It's the wrong approach. All of the attacks that we've seen, it was never an issue of illegally owned. You're focusing all of your security efforts on abusing law-abiding citizens, and you seem to be forgetting that there are criminals, and they're the ones that you should be focusing on. I think it would be good for people who have legitimate security interests can be protected.
For you, from Mrs. Schwab, do you accept?
Yes.
Mrs. Schwab, please, half a minute.
Thank you very much, President. Mr. Wilimski, I listened very carefully to what you had to say, and you pointed out that we should really be focusing on illegal weapons, but the EPP respects the jurisdiction of the member states, and you are from Austria, and I think the idea is not to complicate things. And so my question, are you aware of the distribution of responsibilities, and the fight against illegal weapons is something that would be the responsibility of Austria in this case?
Please go ahead for half a minute.
Thank you very much for your question. I get the impression that Europe is to create freedom and not one bureaucratic step after another. Austria doesn't have a problem with illegal ownership of weapons, and now we've got all of these bureaucratic measures that we need to implement. And the threats are coming from very different areas, from open borders, from jihadists, from terrorists, and from the threats to law-abiding citizens. And that's really what we should be focusing on, and not bureaucratic red tape, as unfortunately you'll probably be adopting today.
For a minute and a half.
Děkuji pěkně, pane předsedo. Dovolte mi, dámy a pánové, několik.
Thank you very much, President. I'd just like to make a couple of comments as a member of IMCO on, I'd like to say two things on the directive. The Commission proposal that was tabled, Commissioner, was very bad. You're talking here about the ambition of the Commission, but your proposal, the Commission, has led to a situation where today we're dealing with an unsuccessful compromise. That's what we'll be voting on. The original compromise was targeted at museums, illegal gun owners, hunters, people who own historical weapons. Now, the rapporteur and the shadow rapporteurs tried. They did their best to improve things, and they have improved the proposal. And I'd like to thank them. But the compromise is still unacceptable for me, and because the compromise still creates restrictions for legal owners of weapons. You can say that former gun owners won't be affected, but future gun owners will be affected. Those who want to buy semi-automatic weapons won't be able to do so. So I think we are interfering in interfering with the legal weapons market, and this is unacceptable. And this is a compromise which perhaps won't affect or harm existing gun owners, legal gun owners, but this is a compromise that I can hardly explain to my voters. I won't be able to explain to them that people in the future won't be able to buy these semi-automatic weapons. So what we need is another proposal.
Well, I'm afraid we will have to proceed in order to keep the schedule. The next would be Mrs. Jaakonsaari for 1 minute. Thank you.
President, I agree with many speakers that we're getting a balanced and good firearms directive which will increase security. It's important that Europe is different than the US, where the ability to get firearms easily has led to serious crimes. They say that they can stop school shootings if teachers have firearms, but Europe is different. That's why it's important that the decision-making process, the Commission, the Council, the Parliament agree. That's what led to this balanced proposal. In Finland, there was most concern about civil defence issues, about the border reserve, and we got a very good solution on this. Friends of civil defence and hunters and collectors can live in peace.
Thank you. Next is I did say that we are a bit behind schedule, so do apologize, but we will proceed with the list, and we might have more time than later on, or for the catch the eye. So at the moment, I would ask Mr. Zahradil for 1 minute.
Pane předsedající, před časem.
President, very recently, Mr. Juncker set out 5 plans for the future of Europe, and one of the points was that Europe should do less but do it better. But in this case, unfortunately, Europe has done more and less well. And the European Parliament is frustrated. Do we want to remove 100 directives, or do we want to ensure that we have the budget? This directive is not going to serve any purpose. I mean, the terrorists are just going to laugh over it because they still have access to the black market. The only thing that you will achieve is that you will undermine national provisions such as we have in my country, and it's basically just manipulation and abuse of illegal gun owners, and I will not support this.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Rapporteur. We all agree that terrorism is something that has created great difficulties for Europe, makes our citizens anxious. We have to combat it together. But what's proposed here by the Commission and the result of the trialogue is not suitable, not appropriate for this. It's already been said that it's focusing on the wrong target group. It's been said it's not a question of cooperation between member states, which we need to fight terrorism. That's not what it's about. But legal gun owners will be harassed by this legislation. It's been said by the rapporteur that hunters are not affected, and the Commission said that as well. It's true. It's also been said that sports shooters will carry on being able to do their sport as long as they get authorisation from member states. And there was talk about the single market, freedom of movement, and I wonder if we want a freedom of movement in the single market, why don't we have minimum standards for legal gun owners and sports shooters? Why don't we leave it up to the member states, and then we get but that I don't think would be proportionate either. That would bring in bans through the back door. So we're going to vote on our amendments as ALDE before we decide on the final vote. I think that's the way of dealing with this matter.
Mr. Mach, 1 minute, please.
You want to fight terrorism by limiting the right to have a legal weapon. This is absurd. You should do something different. You should have protected the external borders better. I know that none of the terrorists used a legal firearm. It was a truck, knives, etc. And so that's... I wonder, why are you doing that? You seem to be... we have to regulate weapons, rabbit hutches, and next we'll regulate the internet, and people have had enough. Citizens in the Czech Republic are against this directive about ownership of firearms, not just citizens but also the Czech government. We've had enough.
Ja, die Berichterstatterin möchte...
The rapporteur wants to use this method to fight terrorism, and she's meeting with the resistance even from her own group. And but the Lex Helvetica, Switzerland is part of the EU, but the Swiss are allowed to keep their weapons, and the EU has made this possible so that there's no referendum in Switzerland about EEA membership. And the right to own a weapon is a symbol in Switzerland, and he knows that the state can't be everywhere to protect people, and Europe is quite far removed from these Swiss considerations, and it is right that people should be punished if they own weapons illegally, because they probably want to undertake illegal activities. But why should legal citizens who have been trained in the use of weapons not have the right to own a weapon?
Thank you. Mr. Mello for a minute and a half.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say that if you look at this legislation, well, I think when it comes to this legislation, the mistakes made by the Commission, it was a bad original proposal, making life more difficult for sports shooters and hunters, and thinking that in that way they might resolve any problem we have with terrorism. I don't think it will resolve our problem. Hunters, sports shooters, collectors don't actually convert weapons in order to attack banks or to attack people on the streets. Collectors, hunters, sports shooters actually respect their weapons, and terrorists, on the other hand, don't buy weapons on the very regulated market, which is subject to registration and traceability, which allow them to be identified. Terrorists use knives, they use axes, they use lorries and trucks, and it's not for this reason that the Commission is now going to make life difficult for lorry drivers. drivers. I mean, what I'm trying to say is the following. Fortunately, the Parliament has been able to work in co-decision, and I myself put forward lots of amendments. I'd like to thank Anna Maria Bildt for the effort that's been made. Today we've got an entirely different text, very different from the one that the Commission was aiming at the beginning, but the aim makes us worry now about the legislative effectiveness. Will this make any difference? We worry about that. So people are trying to link the regulated market, hunters, collectors, sport shooters, to this issue of combating terrorism. This was the impulse, the inspiration behind this. And we're not dealing with illegal trafficking. Well, I think if we dealt with illegal trafficking, then perhaps we might be able to do something about terrorism.
I've already stated that I will not accept any more blue cards for the reasons of time. We will now proceed with Mrs. Gebhardt for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President. Honestly, I think I can't take it when I hear that the right flank of this House, these populists, trade in half-truths and untruths to make citizens unsecure. That's irresponsible. Or have you seen that a hunter takes a Kalashnikov or running around with a assault rifle? Have you seen somebody running about with a semi-automatic weapon to kill people? Yes. And that's the question that we have to answer. We have to make sure that security for citizens is increased. We must make sure that the traceability of weapons is ensured, so that the police can see where do these illegal weapons come from, which are on the market. We must make sure that for citizens we create the rule of law which gives them security and safety. That's the point of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Tomasic, 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the Western world, there has long been a trend of restricting to the greatest possible extent the acquisition and possession of weapons. The state is disarming loyal citizens who possess weapons legally, making them an easy target for criminals and terrorists who buy their weapons on the black market and consciously break the law. It is not weapons that kill, it is people. The role of the state is to make sure that the weapons end up in the hands of exclusively those people who are in no way a threat to their surroundings, and to regularly control whether they are still physically and psychologically fit to use weapons responsibly. It's absurd at this time of a growing terrorist threat to disarm our own citizens. The police and the army cannot be omnipresent, so it wouldn't be a bad thing if among citizens there would be those who are armed and trained to use weapons, ready to help in extreme situations, help themselves and others. Thank you.
Much indeed, Mr. de Grande Pascal, for 1 minute and a half. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President. This debate it basically looks at an old dichotomy. Freedom on the one hand, security on the other. And it's true that the Commission was concerned about cyclical issues, but I think there was excessive regulation proposed here, and I think you've come down on the side of security and you've forgotten a bit about liberty. But fortunately, the dialogue with the affected sectors in this chamber and with Council have corrected this excessively regulatory approach. And now I think we've got a very good proposal. The text that we're going to vote on is the result of a more measured analysis, better than the original proposal from the Commission. This is a text that's been enriched after we've listened to the requirements from society and different sectors who had a lot to say on this subject. And the agreement we've achieved now does deal with the key issues of the sector. It helps strike the right balance between the right to have a legally owned arm and, on the other hand, the security of our citizens. And we also now have a report which is going to look at measures that can be really useful so that we can tackle crime, and it includes some novelties, some new things which allow us to face up to the risks which are a threat to public security. We're strengthening rules relating to the market in firearms, and there's a new obligation to mark all the essential components as well as the guns to prevent reconstruction of inoperable weapons. And there's a new measure added, which means that there's a single common system for the automatic exchange of information between the member states. This is a fundamental measure for the proper functioning of our system and of security. All this makes up a very complete proposal, which I think can reach consensus. We've had dialogue, we've had rationality, and that's allowed us to strike a balance, and I think this is a report which is worthy of our support.
Mr. President, Mr. Commissioner, we have before us a very important report that sparked a lot of controversy, and we know why. Some of our colleagues did not want to explain to the citizens what our aim is with this report. I've put forward amendments regarding more safety regarding online sales, better rules for arms holders, and better medical tests. They did not all come through, but I would like to congratulate the rapporteurs for this compromise, which is much better than the Commission's proposal. This report does not wish to create hurdles for hunters, collectors and so on, but it wants to improve safety for citizens. Better traceability for firearms and components is ensured through this report, and this is why people who deal in arms and firearms holders are made more responsible. This is why I support this report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Next is Mr. Kelmel for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President. From the proponents of the draft up for the vote today, it's often said that collectors and sport shooters can be satisfied with the compromise today. The question is, are they satisfied? I have spoken to very many people in this area, and they are not satisfied. So we can't say they should be satisfied. They aren't. And they're justifiably not satisfied because this directive isn't proportionate. We can't say, because we want to combat terrorism, we impose new regulations on law-abiding people. We don't have a lack of legislation. We have a lack of implementation of legislation, of and even the institutions don't stick to the laws. We must have to work on that. We don't get a secure Europe by making new laws. We must make sure that existing legislation is applied. I will reject this draft. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Florence, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, President. This report from the Commission came to us at a very unfortunate time following the attack in Paris, and there the impression was created that the problem was hunters and sports shooters, but they are not. The weapons that belong to hunters and sport shooters are in the best possible hands, and that will remain the case, and that was just mentioned. And I want to point out that in fact the problem is illegal weapons, and I would just like to add that it's not just terrorists but all sorts of criminals who make use of these illegal weapons, and I regret that the Commission did not address that, and it didn't provide backup for the arguments. We had some very lively debates about that, and they could have taken steps, but they didn't. When I was at school, if I had written a report like this to fight against illegal weapons, I think I would have had to rewrite my copy.
Thank you, Mrs. Virkkunen, for 1 minute, please.
President, I would like to thank the rapporteur, Vicky Ford, and Anna Maria Corazza-Bildt, the shadow rapporteur, that we have a very balanced proposal here. The starting point was poor because the Commission put forward a very unfinished report, and legal for sports shooters, hunters and collectors were dissatisfied because their legal hobby was associated with terrorism. As a result of the process, the shortcomings have been ironed out, and legal shooting can continue. And from the Finns' point of view, the activities of reservists can continue. This is very important from the point of view of civil defence, because reservists are a very important part of civil defence. Significant changes have been brought in, flexibility for and examinations, but also security is increased by the fact that the registration of markings and also the exchange of information between authorities has been improved, and I definitely support this proposal.
And the last speaker on the list is Mr. Karas for 1 minute.
Commissioner, President, dear colleagues, I think we have to establish very clearly that legal weapons owners should not be criminalised, nor should they in this debate, nor in this debate have we criminalised them or penalised them. We want to protect legal weapon owners, and we have to combat and act against illegal weapons owners and those who abuse weapons. And the Commission's proposal for reworking the Weapons Directive, which was proposed a year ago, and the further work we've done on this proposal in the Parliament was done in a very serious way. We've all received many letters and emails from huntsmen and sports shooters, collectors, museums. We've received loads of letters, and they've followed this whole process of amendment as well. They've been involved, and we've improved cooperation between national authorities, and we've improved the marking and traceability of firearms. We are dealing with this issue of converted alarm and acoustic weapons and reconverted deactivated weapons. We've got a balanced final proposal, and I think it also respects subsidiarity, and so the members of my delegation can agree with this final report. Thank you.
Colleagues, hereby the list has been exhausted. I have a long list of requests for catch the eye, but we are limited in time. We'll be able to take one per political group, and I'll see whether we will still manage one or two more. But we'll start with Mrs. Šojdrová for 1 minute.
Kolegyně a kolegové, děkuji za udělení slova. Myslím, že...
Thank you very much, President. I think that the European Parliament has made considerable amendments to the Commission's original proposal. The original proposal was unacceptable, and so I would like to thank the rapporteur for all of the work that has been done. I think that we all agree that we need common standards for deactivation and trade in weapons, and a ban on illegal trade of weapons. We need to improve the exchange of information at European level. I think it is a shame that the compromise which has been submitted still contains some unacceptable things, such as the possession of magazines. And these are issues which should be the competence of member states. But there's no obligation for a mandatory medical check. And there are some amendments which have been proposed. If they are not supported, I will vote against this.
For the catch the eye time, the fact that someone eventually asked for a blue card question, so that we will be as fair as we can be. The next is Mr. Caputo.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Introducing restrictions for the purchase of weapons, at the same time look at those people who own them legally, is not an easy task, but it's important to strengthen security. The changes to the directive that we will vote on tomorrow will fill in gaps in the existing legislation and increase the level of security for European citizens, and it will concentrate on measures designed to prevent the sale of illegal weapons on black markets and to prevent massacres and the illegal use of weapons. It doesn't stop or prevent the use of national legislation on owning weapons, or it doesn't affect or restrict hunting or sports shooting. More could have been done. It would have been better if the Commission had put forward in advance an impact assessment which would have allowed this Parliament to have acted more effectively. We should also focus on the issue of illegal illegal arms trafficking and organised crime and terrorist activities. These are all linked to this, and these are much more serious problems related to the use of weapons. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Marias for 1 minute.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that this directive is not going to aid us in combating terrorism, because terrorists, you know, they have weapons that they buy illegally. So this is a directive which sanctions law-abiding and legal owners of guns, and it also takes away and removes the rights of member states, who are the sole competence for such issues of national security and public order. Member states need to respect their national customs and traditions, the rights of European people, and they need to be able to define the rules under which you can legally own a gun, because, as I said, there are reasons of public order and there's also peaceful coexistence in the country. We also need to implement the principle of proportionality. You know, you have hunters, you have marksmen, target shooters, collectors, museums. They have rights, and you also have legal gun owners. You can't restrict the rights of peoples, because this is collective self-defense, especially around border areas, and in that way they contribute to the country's national defense. Thank you.
Mr. Marias, next for ALDE will be Mr. Marinho Pinto.
President, Commissioner, in this debate there were some arguments used, similar arguments. It's about pressure from the arms industry. It's a bit like the Rifles Association in America, which brings pressure to bear in order to stop changes to legislation. Now, we're not talking about legal ownership of arms. We're talking about the need for proper public security policies. We need security, and that means that we need policemen, and basically we need national policies which will ensure the security of citizens. We don't want people walking around with weapons in order to secure their own safety. That only harms collective security. The only arm that should be allowed for human beings is the word, the use of arguments, the power of speech. That's the most powerful weapon. I think that the possession and control of firearms, these are basically just barbaric situations. In a civilized society, people shouldn't be allowed to have weapons at all. Hunting and the abuse of hunting weapons really is part of a culture of death. It's not a culture which protects life, above all the protection of civilized life in a modern society.
For 1 minute.
Děkuji, pane předsedající. Nejsem myslivec ani sportovní.
I'm not a hunter, I'm not a sport shooter, I'm not a weapon collector. I'm one of those who like to play soldiers from the Napoleonic era. You can imagine that a reconstruction of the Battle of Waterloo would have people with firearms. What would the hundreds of thousands of spectators say? You can't be serious. With this directive, we won't achieve greater security. And people are already laughing at this directive.
Last would be Mr. Funtulis.
Thank you. You are going to be voting on an unreasonable directive which has nothing to do with reality, will not deal anyway with terrorism, and it will only be good for illegal criminal players, and will cause many problems to all legal owners in Europe, millions of them. On terrorism and crime, you should know that terrorist attacks do not use legal guns. You know, you have Kalashnikov firearms, such as the one used in Paris. Well, they're illegal throughout Europe, and this did not mean that the terrorists were not able to acquire them. There is no country in the world where you brought down the rate of criminal acts because you prohibited guns. In most cases they increase. So apart from voting on guns, we should also prohibit knives. We should vote on that because it's equally reasonable or unreasonable. And I think, if we would do that, we would be just as effective as we will be now voting on guns.
Commissioner, I would now like to ask you to respond to the points and questions raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for today's debate. I will make sure that I report on it fully to colleagues. The First Vice President is actually already aware, he's here, but Commissioners Bieńkowska, Avramopoulos and other colleagues who've worked on this dossier over the months. This is a difficult area, and I'm the first to recognise that. I understand the concerns that some of you have voiced on the importance of guaranteeing the rights of legal firearm owners, such as sport shooters, hunters and collectors. Personally, I think that's what the revised directive before you today does. Anyone needing to hold a firearm for a demonstrated legal use, such as sport shooting or for exhibiting in a museum, will still be able to do so, as a number of speakers, not least the rapporteur and other members of the Parliament who work directly on the text, have made clear. What we are doing with this revised text is making sure that the most dangerous firearms do not fall into the wrong hands. A number of you have asked about assessment, the assessment the Commission made. Right at the start of this work, we conducted a number of studies, and these were done in consultation with Member State authorities, stakeholders all across Europe, including hunting, collecting and sport shooter federations. And those studies actually pointed to some of the security loopholes in the existing directive that unfortunately were confirmed in reality and which are being addressed in this text. A report based on those studies was presented to this House and the Council earlier on in this process. You also, a number of you, asked about tackling deactivation. Well, we agree. That's why we are doing work to reinforce the regulation on deactivation. It's going to be revised and strengthened by national experts to address the very technical issues that have been flagged by people in this House. We've spoken, a number of us, about the Europol study that has just come out that addresses this area. It underlines that firearms traffickers are highly adept at exploiting legal loopholes and differences in the regulatory regimes between member states. And they do that to divert firearms from legal suppliers. The reactivation of deactivated weapons, the conversion of blank firing weapons are among the main sources of illegal firearms trafficking in the EU. That's why we need to clarify the rules. But increasing the clarity of the rules around the possession and acquisition of illegal firearms is not sufficient. Again, I'm the first to recognise that. We need a comprehensive approach, including taking forward the fight against illicit firearms trafficking, as a number of you have underlined. Indeed, that Europol report that we've been referring to points to the proliferation and availability of illegal firearms in member states, and that increases the risk of their use by criminals and terrorist groups. That's why the Commission is working closely with member states on the implementation of the action plan against the trafficking of illegal weapons and explosives, as I said, and we count on your support in reinforcing that fight against illegal firearms trafficking. A number of you have underlined the importance of implementation. Again, once this directive, this revised directive, is agreed, it will need to be implemented in the member states. And we will work with you to ensure that this is done effectively and in the spirit of the text. So to conclude, I would just like to say that I hope that the revised Firearms Directive can now be adopted. We, you, many of you, have done intensive work to achieve a good and balanced text that will enhance the security of our citizens, which is our shared objective. Thank you very much.
Commissioner, thank you. Just for the sake of clarity, concerning the impact assessment, there was an impact assessment that was assessed by the Impact Assessment Board, or just a number of studies?
As I described, there are a number of studies, and they were summed up in a report.
And that was assessed by the Impact Assessment Board?
It wasn't assessed by the Impact.
Thank you. Rapporteur, Mrs. Ford, your final remarks, please.
Thank you, colleagues. Let us remember that there was a fundamental flaw in European law. Semi-automatic firearms with a pin through the barrel were able to be bought and sold without permissions. The pins were taken out of the barrel and the guns were used to kill people in Paris. Over 30 of the same guns were found in the United Kingdom. The law needed to be changed. Some people have suggested that this law will take away freedoms for legal owners. This is not true. Hunters, collectors, museums, reenactors, reservists, target shooters will be able to carry on with their sport and hobby both now and in the future, provided their member states agree. That is thanks to the work of this Parliament. We live at a time of fake news. Stop telling people half-truths about what this report does. This report addresses fundamental issues to protect our security, especially about those poorly deactivated firearms. It makes it easier for countries across Europe to work together against terrorism, but it also respects the rights of legal owners to get on with their hobbies, their pastimes, their sports. And I would like to thank all of those legal owners who've helped us to come up with this set of work. Thank you, colleagues. I hope it gets passed, and thank you for your support.
Mulțumim.
Thank you. The debate is now over. The vote will take place later today. We move on to the next item on the agenda, joint debate, circular economy. We have 4 reports by Mrs. Bonafé that we will debate together.